Well, hello everyone. Unfortunately, we're needed to choose the topics that we're going to talk about in Nei Diyoma. In Nei Diyoma are the war that's going on, and we're going to focus today on the Halakhic definitions of war. And what do I mean by that? Why do we need Bichlal to define halachically the idea of war? Why is it important for us to learn, or not to learn, but for the Torah to recognize that war has halachic criteria, and that in order to define and to understand that the situation in front of us is a war, what's important? I'll give you an example. In legal terms, most countries, I didn't check, but I think most countries, probably people who know more about this than I do, there are legal matters involving if you declare the situation a war, or, for example, a mission. In America, there are certain rules about Congress passing only the ability to go to war, and here in Israel also, there are certain takanot l'shat chirum, certain rules, legal matters that change if we declare a war situation rather than just an army mission or etc. From the halachic perspective, why is it important? What do we gain when halakha recognizes that the situation in front of us is declared a war by Jewish law? So I think the answer, before we go into any legal matters, is a very important one, because the first thing about declaring a situation to be a war according to Jewish law is that lo tirtzach is not a problem right now. What do I mean by that? We know that the default of our Torah is that you're not allowed to kill anyone. That's the default. Lo tirtzach means you can't kill anyone. In order for us to as if override lo tirtzach, you have to have a heter. You have to have a heter as if to kill people. I'll give you. I would like to explain this idea by using. I don't remember if I spoke about this once here before. I don't remember. I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself. But one of my favorite books when I was younger was All Is Quiet on the Western Front, in which I remember reading it as a kid, and had a big impression on me. I would tell my students to go to the army. I said to them, before you go to the army, you must read this book, because it makes you think about what you're about to do. In the book, the guy describes that this 18-year-old kid, says, I don't understand. Last week, when there was peace, if I walked over the border into a cafe and shot up people, I would be a murderer, and they would put me in jail for the rest of my life. And today, a week later, the same exact people that I would have killed last week, I would have been called a murderer. Today, if I kill them, I'm a hero. I didn't know them last week. I don't know them today. They did nothing to me last week. Today, they didn't do anything to me either. And yet, if I kill these people, and we're all wearing uniform, then not only am I not a murderer, I'm a hero. So what's the difference? What? The uniform? The day? What exactly changed from an ethical point of view? Now, I'm not going to this very deep conversation, which I don't want to go into right now. But I think that in Bigadol, without going to what's going on right now in Israel, I'm not talking about any specific war right now. The idea that man is permitted to go out and fight and kill needs as if a heter, needs to recognize that the situation in front of us is war, and therefore, under war, you're allowed to kill people. By the way, the Netziv Mivolozhin said this in a few of his works. The Netziv lays down this idea. He talks not only about Jews, he talks about the whole world. He says, when the Torah says you're not allowed to kill, in Parashat Noach already, this does not refer to the idea of war. In war, the world that we live in still recognizes that war is legitimate, and the Isur of Lo Tirtzach as if doesn't apply. So that's first of all. First of all, we need to understand that Lo Tirtzach Hazif is open for discussion, and it's not as it was before. But more than that, we know that the Torah has laws regarding war. Our Torah was the first book of law to ever recognize that within war, there are still rules. And rules apply even in war. It took the world, the Western world at least, thousands of years to recognize such an idea. Some of the idea of the Geneva Convention is totally crazy, if you ask me, but not going into the details right now, the idea that within war there are rules is also, again, for us Jews that come from the Torah, it is important to recognize that if the situation in front of us is declared a war, then certain rules apply. For example, who is exempt from going to war and who is chayav to go to war? So, other examples, what do we need in order to declare a war? In America, we need Congress. According to Jewish law, what do we need?
A king.
We might need a king. We might need a Navi or a Sanhedrin. We might need a Kohen Gadol or a Bitumim, meaning there's a process of how you declare a war according to Jewish law. So there are a lot of details regarding the halachic understanding of what a war is, and there's certain details and rules and laws that apply in war.
You also need to define who an enemy is.
Who said that? I'm sorry?
You also need to define who an enemy is.
Yes, that is correct, and we'll get to that in a second. So I want to talk a little bit about the different types of wars that we have, and the certain ramifications of a war nowadays. So let's start from the Rambam that you have in your source sheet. The Rambam is based on a Mishnah in Sota, a Gemara in Sota, and the Rambam teaches us that a king is supposed to lead the people into war. That's why in the Rambam, Hilchot Melachim u'Milchamotehem appear in one book. The laws of kings appear in the laws of war, because theoretically you can divide into two. There are laws regarding government and king, and there are laws regarding war. That the Rambam brings them together, because in the Rambam's ideal, the king is the one who leads people into battle. And the Rambam mentions a Mechemet Mitzvah. The Mishnah teaches us, the Gemara teaches us, that there are two, begadol, there might be three, but there are two models of war that Halakha recognizes. One we call Mechemet Mitzvah, one Mechemet Reshut. What's Mechemet Reshut? Let's start with Mechemet Reshut. Reshut means usually optional, which means that every government, every nation in its life can decide that it wants to invade another country for its whatever agendas they have. If you're Russia, you go into Ukraine. I don't know. I'm not talking right now ethical, right, wrong. I'm not there right now. I'm talking about in the history of the world. There are many wars. World War I. Can anyone really tell me that who was the bad guy and who was the good guy in World War I? I mean, we like to say that the good guys were the West. Western, no, it's not West. Germany's also West, right? We like to say that the English and the French and the Americans, for some reason, were the good guys because we don't like the Germans. But truthfully, if you try it objectively, no one till today really understands what that war is about. You'd have to, if you want to explain that war, it would take you a few hours to explain it, which means you can't really. It's very hard to put your finger on it. And who was good and who was bad? I don't know. We had Jews on both sides fighting each other, as you know. Right? So World War II was quite simple. There were the good guys, there were the bad guys. Things were simple. World War I is not so simple. Why did they go to war? They had agendas. They had economy, money, land. Mechemet Reshut means an optional war that the Torah recognizes that war is legitimate. Don't get worried. The Torah, the Halakha, needs a lot of rules to allow you to go to the Mechemet Reshut. It's not like, let's go out today. There are a lot of rules put in place, a lot of people that have to be responsible for saying, for going through some kind of, as if committees to decide. Mechelת Reshut. I'm not going to talk today about Mechelet Reshut, although I might mention it later on. However, we have another kind of model called Mechelet Mitzvah. Mechelet Mitzvah, the Rambam says, are the following. What's Mechelet Mitzvah? The war against the 7 nations who occupied Eretz Yisrael, the war against Amalek, and a war fought to assist Israel from an enemy which attacks them. The Rambam talks about three possible scenarios of Mechelet Mitzvah. Amalek, the 7 nations, and Izrat Yisrael Miyad Tzar, which was translated, any enemy which attacks us is considered a Mechelek Mitzvah. Does anyone know about a fourth possible Mechelek Mitzvah that the Rambam does not mention?
Instructions from another.
I don't know about that.
Instructions from another.
Not sure if I would agree with that, but wow, I thought you guys are really a Zionist community. The Ramban brings a fourth. The Ramban brings the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. The Ramban in Mitzvah Daled in Sefer Mitzvot mentions that Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, living in Eretz Yisrael, is a mitzvah aseh, which the Rambam doesn't mention, right? Famously, I'm sure you've heard all about that. The Rambam doesn't say that explicitly. That the mitzvah living in Eretz Yisrael. The Ramban attacks him vehemently that there is a mitzvah living in Eretz Yisrael, and included in that mitzvah, says the Ramban, is the mitzvah to fight for Eretz Yisrael. The Rambam doesn't bring that down. Why? Maybe we'll talk about it if we have time. We'll talk about it.
Initiate or just respond to the other side of
The Ramban, according to the Ramban, in all generations, there's a mitzvah to go out. Theoretically, we'll talk about it. Not everyone agrees that this is what the Ramban means. The pshat of the Ramban. Okay, I have here a book of Rabbi Rabinovitz from Ala Adumim, who disagrees with what I'm about to say right now. But the pshat of the Ramban, as many people understand it, is that in all generations there would be a mitzvah to conquer Eretz Yisrael and to settle the land of Israel. And part of the mitzvah of settling the land of Eretz Yisrael is also fighting for Eretz Yisrael. And that theoretically should be a mitzvah in all times. Rabbi Rabinowitz doesn't agree with what I just said now, and maybe we'll get back to him in a second. However, yes, Maksha?
Well, but couldn't that be subsumed under the Shiva Amamim?
Maybe. That is a possibility. Maybe we'll get there. Again, there's a lot of things going on here. I'm trying to focus right now. But you may be onto something. What do all these cases have in common? Shiva Amamim, Amalek, Izrat Yisrael Miyatzar, and Eretz Yisrael, according to the Rambam. What do they all have in common?
Hashem tells us to do it.
Yes, but they're called Mechelek Mitzvah. Why? Because there is a mitzvah involved. Right? There's a mitzvah involved. The 7 nations, there's a mitzvah to destroy the 7 nations. There's a mitzvah to destroy Amalek. There's a mitzvah, according to Ramban, to live in Eretz Yisrael. What did I leave out? Izrat Yisrael Miyatzar. Izrat Yisrael Miyatzar. What is the mitzvah of Izrat Yisrael Miyatzar, or in the words of the Rambam, the war fought to assist Israel from an enemy which attacks them. Now I want to explain, before I continue, I mentioned before that there are nafkaminas. There are halakha ramifications if you declare the situation a war, and specifically a Mechelek Mitzvah. For example, and I said to you before, we all know that the Torah says that not everyone goes to war. Not everyone goes to war. Who is exempt from going to war? A newly married person, a person who just had a vineyard, a person who just built a house. These people are patur from war. Oh, the Mishnah says they're only patur from the Mechelek Reshut. The Mechelek Mitzvah, Hakol Yotzim. Everyone goes out to war. Even a Chatan and even a Kala, which really pshat of the Mishnah means that who goes to war? Men and women. That's the pshat. And you know who holds by that? The Rambam. The Rambam doesn't apologize, the Rambam quotes the Mishnah as it is, Hakol Yotzim, Chatan v'Kala. Everyone goes to war. So that's an afkamina. If it's Mechelek Mitzvah, we according to Jewish law, we have to know who goes to war. So I want to understand. The mitzvah, Shiva Amamim, I understand. Amalek, I understand. What is the mitzvah involving Ezrat Yisrael Miyad Tzar? It sounds like a very petty, like a small question, right? I want to tell you that I've asked certain people this question. They looked at me like, "Oh, you're right. What is? So before I go on, I will tell you that Rav Yair Khan, a Rabbi in Gush, a friend of my family's, wrote a whole article about this question. A whole article. He asked this question at the beginning of the article, and I would like to, next few minutes, try to respond to this question. But Vakasha, what are the options?
Well, I was thinking about it. If somebody comes to kill you, kill them first. If they're attacking us, we have the right to.
Mitzuyan. Where is that mitzvah mentioned in Torah? Abalo v'chashkin l'go is not mentioned in the Torah. Baba Machteret. Okay, you're onto something. It's actually not Baba. It's probably from the Aram Urasa, by the way. The Gemara, but you're right. That's a sugya in Hedron that talks about talks about this discussion. You're right. I actually thought that before you would say that, you would say something more basic than that. The Chaybem, I don't know. That's a really a little bit far. The Chaybem means to live by the Torah. Yes. You should take care of your bodies. Yes. Oh, thank you. That's what I was waiting for. You should have started earlier because I would have liked that. Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. I want to talk about that for a second. The Torah says, Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. What does that mean? That means that you're not allowed to stand idle while your fellow friend is being killed. You have to get involved. The Torah has a law that does not allow you to stand on the side when someone's in danger. If I'm not mistaken, years ago, Hanan Porat passed a law in the Knesset called Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. He passed a law using those words, which means that you could be prosecuted if you can help someone that is dying and you do not, you can be taken to jail. Because you have a responsibility to interfere, to get involved. Everyone knows it's famous. I don't know if it's true, but there's like this kind of stigma, stereotype in New York City. Like on the subway, people like dying and people just walking by. I don't know if that's true. I don't know. People always, the good cemetery. But I don't know why people always spoke about that's for doctors. But that's because also for insurance, I think for insurance issues that was. Because the doctor was afraid to get involved because he might be sued afterwards. I think that was a problem. That's what I remember. Right, that's what I remember.
Somebody recently got involved and they did want to prosecute him for getting involved.
Right, I remember something like that.
There was the vigilante type, the anti-gay.
Right, I remember something like that. Anyway, some people argue, the Chelik Mitzvah, when we're being attacked, when we're under threat, and we respond and fight back, is the mitzvah of Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. However, there's a major problem if we suggest that mitzvah is a source of our Milchemet mitzvah. And why is that? Because there's a very famous machloket. How far does a person have to go in order to save someone's life? Let's say you're walking and you see someone, chas v'shalom, drowning, and you're a great swimmer. Okay, you have to jump in the water and save that person. What happens if you're a terrible swimmer? What happens if the water is very choppy and very dangerous? Does a person have to endanger their own lives to save a person who's drowning? How much do you have to put your own life into jeopardy in order to save someone's life? This is considered to be a machloket poskim. Let's understand the other side. The other side, of course, is the famous story about the water in the desert. You have one bottle of water for two people, one can drink it. There, we know that Rabbi Akiva famously said, your life comes before your fellow friends, and there is no requirement, and maybe even a prohibition, theoretically, for you to kill yourself, basically, in order to save someone else's life. But the middle case is to put your life in grave danger. Most poskim understand that this is a machloket between the Bavli and the Yerushalmi, between both Dvaras, whether or not the Bet Yosef quotes this machloket, whether or not you really have to, and the normative psak, the accepted ruling is that one is not required to do such a thing. Chayecha kodmim Your life comes first, and there is no requirement. It could be, by the way, that you're permitted to, you're allowed to put your life in jeopardy. But there's no obligation to do so. Now, of course, if that is our source, then it would be almost ridiculous to use that as a source from Milchama. Because obviously, in Milchama, automatically, you are putting your life in danger without even, I would say even more than that. The laws of Pikuach Nefesh don't even begin in war. Which takes me back to my earlier question. Why do we need to declare the situation of war a war? Because of this matter. Because usually Pikuach Nefesh is a law that applies in all situations except the three, everyone knows, except Gilei Rosh, Chut Damim, and Avodah Zarah. But that's not true. There are four things that Pikuach Nefesh overrides, that doesn't override. One of them is war. Can you imagine a firm guy in war, and an officer says, "Okay, everyone, we're now jumping to the next hill," and they're firing. And the guy says, "I'm firm. I'm not allowed to put my life in danger. I'm not afraid, just because of firm reasons. Pikuach Nefesh, you know, it's dangerous." That's ridiculous, right? So who says that? The Minchas Chinuch. The Minchas Chinuch, it's something that's so simple and yet has to be said. The Minchas Chinuch says that the laws of Pikuach Nefesh are not effective in wartime. They don't begin. They're not a consideration. And war overrides the laws of Pikuach Nefesh. I'll give you the best. There's so many examples for this, but Entebbe operation, right? Entebbe operation. What heter is there to go and put your life in danger to save hostages? Why putting more people's life in danger? I mean, I know it sounds like a silly question, but if you look at it as if from very, very kind of cold, objective kind of approach, that you might think, what is a heter to put people's life in danger? The answer is very simple. There is no pikuach nefesh. When if you have a guy that's if you saw the movie Saving Private Ryan, remember that story? So there was a guy who in World War II, they made a movie about, I don't know if it's a true story, but they made a movie about this guy who lost 4 of his brothers in World War II, and then they decided to save the 5th brother. And they sent in a group of 20 soldiers, put their life in danger, and spoiler alert, none of them really came back, to save this one guy. Now, is that justified? Yeah, it's very emotional, very touching, very heartbreaking that this guy lost all his brothers. But can you really justify putting 20 people in danger and no, it's probably a suicide mission for saving one person? Halakhically, would you even allow such a thing? The answer again would be that if you go through the war kind of model, then in war, we don't necessarily always think about numbers like we would in Pikuach Nefesh. We have greater, we see the victory, we see the bigger picture. And for that, Pikuach Nefesh doesn't come up as a factor in our halakha. That's a very important idea which is discussed a lot. So I go back to my question. If lo ta'amod l'amrecha is not the source of the mitzvah that permits us to go to war, what is the heter in war? So people mentioned habal or bicha shkem l'orgo. And I agree partially. I said to you before, habal or bicha shkem l'orgo is not written in the Torah.
Can you trace that?
Oh, so I'm sorry. A person who comes to kill you, hashkem l'orgo, get up earlier and kill him, meaning self-defense. Basically self-defense, but not only, it's more than self-defense. It means that, right, you're allowed to even wake up early in the morning before he gets to you, right? 6-day war. 6-day war is a classic habal or bicha shkem l'orgo, because some people claim till today that on 67, out of nowhere, Israel attacked Egypt, right? We just were bored that day. And it was just like, we wanted to look for a fight. Everyone knows that if we wouldn't have fought the first strike, so who knows where we would be today. Unfortunately, in Kippur War, we didn't do that, unfortunately. Okay.
And even right now,
And even right now, you can argue about that. Yeah, I agree. Habala b'chashkim l'orgo is not mentioned in the Torah, but it is connected to what you guys mentioned before, Rodef, Baba Machteret perhaps, Na'aramu Rasa. The Torah talks about scenarios that you're allowed to protect yourself, you're allowed to respond. The only problem with that I have with those psukim, with those ideas, is that they're about individuals. We're talking about a war to a nation, to a people. However, I will agree with what you said, but I want to explain a little bit better if that's okay. And I'm going to use one of the most beautiful articles that I ever read in my life of Rav Soloveitchik, Kol Dufek. Years ago, it was retranslated into English. It's called Kol Dufek. I'm sure people read it and are familiar with it. For those who are not, I will explain. In 1948, Rabbi Soloveitchik delivered a lecture in which he explained his connection to Israel and Zionism and why he believed that the events to do with the establishment of the State of Israel have ramifications that to do with the Jewish people in the past, in the present, and the future, and how these events really have changed history, and really HaKadosh Baruch Hu is knocking on our door. He used the idea of Kol Dodi Dofetim Shir Shirim, that these events as God, as if knocking on the world and giving over certain messages and waking up the whole world to realize what's happening here. We have to hear God's voice in these events. We have to see the biblical events that are taking place and their meaning to our lives and the people around us, what it means. So he talks about 6 knocks, and one of them, he says, I'm going to read not all of it, if that's okay, but I'll read to you what he says. The 5th knock of the beloved is perhaps the most important. This is 1948. For the first time in the annals of our exile.
56.
I'm sorry?
It was a speech to be 56. It was the speech that you gave to Zion.
Did I just make that up? Did I just make that up? 66. You're right. You're right. I'm sorry.
Just the beginning of current events.
Yes. 1 second. Sorry. Are you sure? Wait just a second.
I looked it up.
What?
I looked it up.
You lived in 1966? I'm sorry.
56.
56. I'm sorry. That's correct. 56. I remember it wasn't 40. You're right. Thank you. 56. I'm sorry. I apologize. 56. No. People, by the way, explain that this speech of the Rav, thank you very much for that. When people talk about Rav Soloveitchik's connection to Zionism, this no doubt, this article, there are a few other articles, but this is the most important one. There's a very famous story that it was learned by a group of a class in Israel somewhere in the 70s, before the Rav died, maybe late 60s, early 70s, and the girl turned to their teacher and said, wow, this is where does this rabbi live in Israel? Because obviously he is a big Zionist, and she says, no, he never made it to Israel. And they said, what? How can that be? This is like the most Zionist thing we've ever learned and read in our life. So the teacher wrote a letter to Rav Soloveitchik and asked him why he didn't make Aliyah. And the Rav responded. The Rav asked, and this it's been printed in Rabbi Helfgott. My friend Nadi Helfgott has a book about the Rav's letters. So in that book, the Rav's letter is there explaining why he didn't make Aliyah. I actually, a few years ago, started collecting throughout Jewish history letters and articles of rabbis who explained why they didn't make Aliyah. I started from the Kuzari up until nowadays. Maybe another time I'll talk about it. Anyway, the Rav here explains that for the first time in our exile, our enemies, I'm not reading the whole thing, have been amazed with the astounding discovery that Jewish blood is not cheap. If the anti-Semites describe this phenomenon as being an eye for an eye, we will agree with them. Well, what I should have done is I should have read this and then asked you who wrote this. Not many people would say Rav Soloveitchik, brother. If do it to your friends, by the way. Try it. Try it with your friends. Okay. If we want to courageously defend our continued national historical existence, we must from time to time interpret the verse of an eye for an eye literally. So many eyes were lost in the course of our bitter exile because we did not repay hurt for hurt. The time has come for us to fulfill the simple meaning of an eye for an eye. Again, I'm going to skip a little bit. He says, with respect to the mufti and Nazir, I would demand that we interpret the verse in accordance with its literal meaning, to take an actual eye. I mean, I don't want to talk about Moshe Dan right now, but okay. Pay no attention. I'll skip a little bit. Look at the bottom. The Torah has always taught that a man is permitted, indeed, has a sacred obligation to defend himself. And this is what you all mentioned before about Baba Machteret. The Torah establishes that the Halakha, that one may defend not only one's life but his property as well. If the thief comes to take his property, he is capable to killing the householder. The householder may rise up against him and kill him. For good reason, the Torah relates that two of its great heroes, Avram and Moshe, took sword in hand to defend the brethren. We just read 2 weeks ago. But Avram that rescued the captives, and Moshe killed the Egyptian. This behavior does not contradict the principle of loving kindness and compassion. On the contrary, a passive position without self-defense may lead sometimes to brutality. I'm going to skip a little bit. Towards the bottom, 78 lines from the bottom. In general, how absurd is the request that an entire people be dependent upon the kindness of others and remain that the ability to defend itself. Public and private honor is dependent upon the possibility of defending one's life and one honor. A people that cannot defend its freedom is neither free nor independent. He ends this paragraph, the next page on the top. The antidote for the venom that poisons minds and dulled hearts is the readiness of the state of Israel to defend the lives of its citizens. Listen, my beloved Knox. Does this answer our question? Not directly, but it does continue the thoughts that you mentioned before. There is no specific mitzvah per se that you can say we are fulfilling by fighting for our lives. Because there's something much more basic of understanding that people have the right to live, to breathe. It's something so yesodi, so fundamental, so elementary. It's not just a little pasuk to. It's something so basic that I think that's what the Rav is talking about here. The right to exist, the right to breathe, the right to live. That is a basic law that exists within the nature of the world. One does not need to find a pasuk as if that says, "Aha! Here I have a heter. I have a verse that allows me to breathe, right? Allows me to exist. That allows me to live." I think that this attitude, at least, is saying that there's something very basic about defending oneself. And yes, the Torah talks about this in different places, but we don't need necessarily a pasuk that teaches me if someone's about to kill you, you're allowed to kill them back. Habalak hashkim le'orgo is not even mentioned because it's so basic, it's so elementary that it's not even needed to be said as a pasuk, as a mitzvah of itself. I think that's one way of looking at it. Please, yes.
Isn't it also kind of machil Hashem when Jewish people are massacred the way they are? Conversely, a kiddush Hashem when we do take revenge against our enemies.
I agree, but that I don't think that's the same. I mean, I by the way, it was Rabbi Israeli who really expanded upon this idea very much. Rabbi Israeli said that wars. I didn't think of talking about this today, but Rabbi Israeli really has a whole article in which he connects Kiddush Hashem and Chil Hashem to war, and he also, by the way, used that to explain the same way Kiddush Hashem overrides everything else in Judaism, so does war. Meaning his heter for why there's no Pikuch Nefesh in war is because of the element of Kiddush Hashem. I agree. Rabbi Mital also talked about that. Rabbi Mital used to talk about that idea too. I agree with you that might be another option. I wasn't getting there today, but that might be another possibility. I want to talk about another possible way of looking at this from a different perspective, and that has to do with, interestingly enough, another note of Rav Soloveitchik that appears also in Kol Dodidofik. This note, footnote, has become very, very famous, even though it's only a footnote in an article that's not even halachic. In this note, Rav Soloveitchik pointed out that it's possible to argue that the source of all Milchemet Mitzvah of Izrat Yisrael Miyatzar, of fighting our enemies, is taught to us from Amalek, from the mitzvah of killing Amalek. Let's go back. We said that there's a mitzvah to kill 7 nations and the mitzvah to kill Amalek. Do those mitzvot apply today?
Amalek for all times, it says so. Do we know who it is?
Oh, so our biggest problem is, I mean, you could talk about a problem or we could talk about a solution, right? But the fact is that we don't know today who they are. And that's based upon a Gemara that appears in several places in Shas that tells us that in the days of Sancheriv, around 700 BC, when Sancheriv, the king of Assyria, came to Israel, and that was one of the most terrible events in Jewish history. The 10 tribes were taken into exile, never to return again. And Chizkiyahu Melech Yehuda, if you remember, was under siege, and that was the closest time, I think, in Jewish history that we were about to be destroyed as a people. And there was a great miracle there, and Chizkiyahu, and they were saved. The Gemara says that during those wars, as the Tanakh describes it, Sancheriv messed up all the nations of the world. He had this kind of strategy that the way to keep peace in his kingdom was to move the tribes and cities and people all around the whole world. So he took in Malachim. Remember, it says that all these people came into Israel. They were eating up by lions. Remember that story in Malachim? Anyway, he messed up the whole area, and people intermarried, people assimilated, and no one knows anymore who a Chiti, Vusi, Moavi, Ammoni is. And that's why the Gemara in Brachot says that there was a guy who came to the Beit Midrash one day and says, I'm a descendant of Ammoni, and they said, oh, we can't have you convert. And the Gemara says, no, nonsense. We don't know anymore who's an Ammoni, Moavi. It's all messed up. Sancheriv canceled it, and we don't know who people are anymore. Yes?
You asked, does Amalek apply? If it applies, if today by DNA I could find out that someone is a descendant of Amalek, the law does what it says for all generations.
Okay, so that's an interesting question. I don't want to talk about that. It's an interesting question. I would say about that, but not interesting question. Let's go back to the 7 nations, okay? So there is no mitzvah today to kill 7 nations. You may be right. You may be right that if today someone would come. By the way, there's a very funny, when I say funny, there's a satirical article written about exactly that thing. That one day a guy comes up and says, I just found out, some non-Jew finds out that he's Amalek, descendant of Amalek, and he offers himself to the Jewish people for them to fulfill the mitzvah. And the article is about how the rabbis for 50, 60 years argue how the mitzvah should be done. And the guy says, no, do it. And they say, no, well, hey, we have to decide who's going to be. They decide that at the time it was like Rabbi Yoshev and Rabbi Rashab. So he'll be the kvater, he'll be the shochet. And then they decided how they can kill him, what method, skila, reisva, hereg, and then they decide and they argue about this and what kli should they use and whatever. And it goes on for 3-4 pages of halakha discussions, and the guy of course dies of old age. And so it's a very, if you ever want to read, it's a very cute little piece. But going back, so there's no mitzvah today because we don't know who they are, and that's how the Rambam rules. The Rambam Hilchot Melachim tells us there's a mitzvah to kill the 7 nations. But not anymore. Lama? Kvar Avad Zichra. The Rambam says their memory is lost. We don't know who they are. And then in the next halakha, the Rambam says there's a mitzvah to kill Amalek. And that's it. He doesn't say Ukvar Avad Zichra. Oh, so come down. What? Oh, wait. So you can argue by the way. The Rambam didn't need to repeat it again. He just said Ukvar Avad Zichra. But famously, Rabbi Soloveitchik mentions the name of his father or grandfather. People have different discussions who actually said this. That the Rambam is coming to teach us that regarding Amalek is not only a nation by DNA, it is a concept, it's an ideology. And in every generation there could be an Amalek. And that's in front of you. You can see what I just said. Look at the bottom, please, on the bottom of the page, page 3. From Maimonides' words, it appears that Amalek still exists in the world. Whether the 7 nations of Canaan do not. One wonders, why doesn't it apply the rule that Sennacherib came and intermingled all the nations? The answer is very simple. The Bible testifies that Amalek still exists in this world. Go and see what the Torah says. The Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. Accordingly, it is impossible for Amalek to be blotted out of the world until the coming of the Mashiach. God's name and throne will not be complete until the children of Amalek are blotted out. But where is Amalek? I heard the answer from my father's blessed memory. Every nation that conspires to destroy the Jewish people is considered by the Halakha to be Amalek. Now, there's no question that the Rav had in his mind Germany, not Germany. I can tell you that Rabbi Rabinowitz was very worried about this idea of Rabbi Soloveitchik. And in his book about war, he says, it's a drush. It's not halakhic. It's very interesting how he has a whole piece in his book here. Here, the Mamash, he has a question. The question was, Ra'iti b'sefer drashot shel Rav Soloveitchik. Someone asks him in the name of Rav Moshe Soloveitchik that says that anyone who destroys Am Yisrael is Amalek, and he says, no, it's only Amalek, and this is only a drasha. He goes on for 2 pages. מה שהביא רב משה סולובייצ'יק, ברור שאין זה אלא דרוש. הוא אמר את הדברים נגד הנאצים שהם עשו מעשי עמלק. אין ספק שלחובתנו לא לשכוח שעלו בני עוולה, לא לסלח לפושעים, etc., etc. So he really did not like it that people use this idea. However, I'm not here to argue with Rabbi Rabinowitz, who is a major Talmud Gadol, but I think that perhaps I think that the Rav perhaps did feel that this, what he's saying, is not just a drush, and I'll explain in what way. If you look at the next few lines, he quotes his father, who said, my father added, I'm on page 4, 5 lines from the top. My father added that as concerned Amalek itself, we were commanded to perform 2 mitzvot. For the individual to blot out the memory of Amalek, and to slay any individual member of Amalek. As it says in Torah, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek. And B, for the community to engage in communal military preparedness war against Amalek. He said that there might be 2 mitzvot in Milchemet Amalek. One is really seems to be what we spoke about, like the genetic Amalek. And the other one is a milchama of the tzibur, of the people, to fight against Amalek. And it's not that far-fetched. And people say, it wasn't only Rav Soloveitchik who said this idea, that it could be that the milchemet mitzvah of Ezrat Yisrael miyad tzar is learned from Amalek. That not to say that's what I think Rabbi Rabinowitz was very careful. Rabbi Rabinowitz was scared that people would use this as a reason to, let's say, kill all the Arabs. They're mad, because they would say, look, they're right, Amalek, let's kill all the Arabs. I think he was very worried about that. But I think a very simple distinction can be made. Not to say that the Amalek law applies automatically to every nation that wishes to destroy us. That we must apply the law of killing everyone, as we do in Amalek, but rather the idea of defending and fighting back our enemies. Any enemy that wishes to destroy us, to kill us, is Amalek in the sense that it's a mitzvah to kill them back. It's a mitzvah to defend, it's a mitzvah to protect, it's a mitzvah to fight them back.
That makes them simple.
And if that's really the situation, then it's easier to argue that the Milchemet Mitzvah of the Rambam of Ezrat Yisrael miyad tzar is learned like a binyan av, like a model case of Milchemet Amalek, and that the war of, and why is that important? Because I think it's important because there's something to say about Amalek. That perhaps the Torah is the Torah really separates Amalek from any other nation in so many different ways. In the description of Amalek, the Torah is very, very detailed in how it describes the reasons for Amalek fighting the Jewish people. Asher kalcha b'derech, vayizaneh b'cha kol hanechashalim acharecha. Who are they killing? The old, the weak, the elderly, the children, the women. They're in the back of the machaneh. My Abba, Alav Shalom, told me that he was once in the shir of Rabbi Soloveitchik. Rabbi Soloveitchik quoted a famous anti-Semite, who was a very famous historian, Toynbee, apparently he was a big anti-Semite, I heard. And yet he was a person who once explained the 4 reasons in the history of the world why people go to war. For religious reasons, for land, for money, for power, for different reasons that he mentioned. And Rabbi Aaron Soloveitchik explained why every reason that he mentioned in his famous theory is cancelled out by the Torah. Asher karcha b'derech. There's no land. We're on the way. We're not in the land. We're not fighting for land. There's no glory of war. They're killing the women, the children. There's no. It's not like we're fighting. We're tired. We're weary. It's not a war against 2 nations that you can say there's a benefit. V'lo yarei Elohim, said Rav Soloveitchik. There's no religious war involved. V'lo yarei Elohim. So you ask yourself, why does Amalek fight the Jewish people? The answer is hatred. Pure hatred with nothing to gain. With nothing to gain. Now, I believe that we, the Jewish people, have a major problem. We are good people. And we have a very difficult time understanding what makes people bad and evil, that they're willing to sacrifice themselves, their kids, their family, their people, just because they want to kill Jews. We don't understand it. And I think because we don't understand it, we pay a big price for this misunderstanding. In the Holocaust, we paid a big price. And during this war, we paid a big price because we don't see it. We still can't understand it. Can anyone, I know I'm talking maybe a little bit out of my shir right now, but can anyone, please don't answer me right now because we'll get into a whole discussion. Can anyone really understand what made them attack us now? What were they thinking? What did they think was the end game? Did they really think they would succeed and win? So we don't understand. We understand rational decisions that people will make. You go to war with understanding that you're going to accomplish something that's accomplished. That can be accomplished, right? But this is like a suicide mission. It's a suicide mission of killing people, right? So I think that if anything, this war, I think the words of Rav Soloveitchik here about that the source of Mechemet Mitzvah of Ezrat Yisrael Miyatzar, it goes back to Mechemet Amalek, I think is a very profound idea. And I agree with the gentleman before that there might be a third possibility of Kiddush Hashem. I agree with you. What's your name? Sorry. I agree with that's a third possibility which I didn't have time to talk about today. But the Gadol, Mechemet Mitzvah, according to what we just said now, might be either the basic elementary mitzvah to be alive. That every human being in the world has the right from its birth to protect themselves, to defend themselves. That might be the basic mitzvah. Rabbi Yair Khan, in his book, talks all about that idea, develops this idea very much. The second part, and Rav Soloveitchik, I think talks about that in Kol Yofek. The second model, possibility of Mechemet mitzvah, we just said might be learned from Mechemet Amalek. And as I said, a third possibility might be the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, of Yichud Hashem. The Rambam talks about that a little bit. I said Rabbi Israeli develops that idea, Rabbi Tal develops that idea. That really might be a third idea. I have 5 more minutes, and in which I will explain to you perhaps the difference between the different types of war. The Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvot tells us in his introduction which mitzvot he's counting, which not, the problem he has with counting certain mitzvot, and he says the following. He says, Yadua, she'nevuah lemelucha, I will translate, v'mistalku meno. We know that today there's no prophecy, there's no kingship, there's no malchut anymore. And he says, and therefore how did he count the mitzvot to talk about them? He says, Yadua, it's known, she'amilchamot v'kibush ha'aratzot lo yeh ela b'melech. He said it's known that in order to go out to war, you need a king. Now, the question is, do you need a king because you need a king, or because you need a king? Meaning, do you need a king because you need a government to go to war, right? If we live in Chutz La'aretz right now, and we decide as individuals to fight, is that really a war of the Jewish people? So you need a king to make it into a national thing, or is it a real legal matter that in order to have a war, you need halachically a king? But he goes on. Lo yela b'melech u'be'atzat senedrin gdola. You need a Sanhedrin, which we don't have, and Kohen Gadol. Kohen Gadol means Urim v'Tumim. And the Rambam here does not differentiate between Mechelet Mitzvah and Mechelet Reshut, which made some people question nowadays whether or not we can define what's going on today as Mechelet Mitzvah according to the Rambam. We have no Sanhedrin, we have no Kohen Gadol, we might have Melech not as a king, but as a government, If you read, this is a shir of itself, but if you understand that the Israeli government, without going to politics right now, that the Israeli government is considered a malchut, then we can argue, that's what Rav Kook very famously said, Rav Kook, who died way before we had a state, spoke about this very clearly, that a Melech Yisrael is just a metaphor for sovereignty, for government. So that might be true. But we have no Sanhedrin, we have no Kohen Gadol. How do we have a Mechelet Mitzvah today? The answer is very simple. Very simple. Even if the Rambam held that we need all that from Mechelet Mitzvah, it is simple and clear that he meant Mechelet Mitzvah of Shiva Amamin and Amalek, not Ezrat Yisrael Miyatzar. Because what we said before, going back to the first point, that it is our natural duty and responsibility to protect ourselves, that is not a milchama for the sake of performing a mitzvah per se. But that's a natural response that everyone has. For that, you don't need a king, you don't need declaration, you don't need anyone. That is just a natural instinct to protecting yourself. So it's clear that even if you hold that that's what the Rambam meant, he was not referring to the model of Ezrat Yisrael Miyatzar, which would lead us, therefore, to argue that today's milchama, and I would say every milchama, it's not my opinion, all the famous rabbis who argue from 48, we are unfortunately in one large Mechelet Mitzvah, and if we were to talk about halakha ramification, Mechelet Mitzvah, it would all apply in the wars that we live through today. Thank you very much. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Before that, 1 second. Someone asked me before. I brought some of my books. People, it sounds like really trying to sell here. I am. I have this is my book that I wrote called State of Halakha. I have some here. I think we sent out the link if people are interested. I'm happy to.
Is it in English?
It's English. Yeah, it's only in English. Yeah, it's only in English. So please come to me now. And I have a few here. Yeah.
Can you say, according to Rav Soloveitchik, when he quotes this pasuk, the Lord will wage war with us, he taught from generation to generation that Torah is saying that it always exists. It's totally
I agree with you. I knew that was coming.
Oh, okay. I sound like what you had said.
No. I knew it was
Okay.
My father was
So maybe I misheard. I know. I
Yeah.
know the family.
Thank you. So you take this one. I have in the car. If you, I just, brownish.
And then I said,
What?
If you're knitting, I would say